Hey, Katie, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, thank you so much for your time. This is actually a kind of special coffee chat because for this one, there's a very specific audience. People who are getting advanced degrees, specifically PhDs, and thinking of transitioning to industry. So I know we both have experience with that. We're both in industry now, and I would absolutely love to just chat about any tips both of us might have. I, for example, found it very, very tough mentally. So I want to provide another resource for anyone who's considering going from academia to industry.
Awesome.
What's your academic background and how did you find yourself in industry?
Yeah, so I got all three of my degrees in communication. And if you're not familiar with communication, it's just a social science, really similar to social psychology. Long story short is I was in my PhD. I was full steam ahead for going into academia. I was really being groomed for that life to become an assistant professor once I graduated. And then I hit a point of burnout that I just couldn't recover from. And I started kind of reevaluating what my strengths were, what my weaknesses were, where I found success in my working style. Academia wasn't checking the boxes for me. I just worked a lot better in a collaborative environment and I was feeling really isolated. So I started trying to casually look at what other things are out there for researchers with a PhD. Googling research in industry or in companies. I started finding like market research, consumer insights, things like that. And it wasn't for a while that I actually found UX. And the way that I found it was through a good friend of mine who had gotten her master's at UC Santa Barbara alongside me. But then she actually left because she knew already that academia was not working for her. And she went into UX instead. She took me to a meetup, which I highly recommend for anyone who's like, I need to meet people in this field. I went and started making connections there and building my network.
So did you start doing it before you finished your PhD?
Yes, probably about 9 months before I finished my PhD.
It's so great you knew someone. I didn't have that. 2 years before I finished my PhD, I had this realization that, I would like to be very flexible in general. And I really decided to focus on getting more and more research skills so I could be working in different settings. And then to be honest, when I was finishing up the dissertation, it was my last year. And suddenly I was in this complete state of confusion of what to do. So for some reason, even though for 2 years I've been preparing to be more flexible, I started applying for academic jobs and I didn't know what else to do. I knew no one outside of academia. And it was only a little bit later, somebody recommended, well, if you're really looking around, you should have a LinkedIn. I'm like, and funny thing actually, guys, when I finally was 100% on board that, I think I want an industry job. That's when I did the best thing. I started reaching out to people and Katie, you were one of them.
Yeah.
I just found you on LinkedIn.
I know LinkedIn is such an essential part of getting an industry job. And I totally feel that not knowing where to look. I remember the moment when I realized, for the jobs that I'm looking for, they're all housed in the design departments. I would have never guessed that or known that because I was so new to user experience. Once I realized that, then I started finding all these jobs. So my advice, if you're still in grad school or even fresh out of grad school, just start learning the places where UX people are. Building a network is probably the number one most important thing. You started by just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I did the same thing. I reached out to random people. The people who did respond were usually very helpful and they would give me more breadcrumbs to follow. And then I also started listening to podcasts and reading, learning the jargon and the lingo, because as a PhD, we know how to do research, but we do not know how to talk about it in industry. So just learning what a deck is, what stakeholders are, is really essential, especially when you're interviewing. It can make or break your interview.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm interested in professional development in general because for the last 3 years I've been teaching an internship class for undergraduates. One of the things I learned, exactly what you're talking about right now, is informational interviews. Until I did that, nothing was working out because I didn't know what exact jobs to look for. I didn't really know what my resume should look like. So informational interviews is just you asking someone for a little bit of time to chat about their career. You're not asking for anything. You're not asking for a job. You're not asking them to review your resume. You're not asking for anything other than to meet talk about their journey, ask some questions, and that's it. So I literally reached out on LinkedIn, searched for people who had similar PhDs and backgrounds to me, and looked for anyone who might be in any kind of non-academic job.
I did something really similar, just to kind of add on to what you said about informational interviews. That is such a great point. I can only speak for the field that I'm in, but people in, I think most fields, especially UX, want to help you, but they're stretched thin. Giving even 30 minutes to someone is a lot, and asking someone to review your resume is a bigger ask than you realize. So I would save that for people that you know well, people that you've built that relationship with. Use those first conversations as a way to just understand who they are and what advice they have to give.
And I just want to say that I think for a lot of people, it's kind of awkward, right, to reach out to someone. It was definitely to me. I actually started because I went to a conference in anthropology and there was somebody there doing a talk on industry, and she made us right there. You're going to reach out to 5 people right now and write a message. And I was like, it was so awkward. And I just did it, right? My best advice for someone, if you're uncomfortable doing it, suck it up and do it. It gets easier. And some people might not reply, fine. Some people might not have time. Some will. Keep reaching out. You just have to get over the first couple, and then it gets more natural. It's not a big deal.
I think another really good piece of advice that I was given is to ask for people to introduce you. So that gal that I met at the meetup, she was like, I know this really awesome gal who used to be at Facebook as well. She's now a career coach. Would you like me to introduce you? And so she did it right on LinkedIn messaging, and gave me a little bit about who she was, a little blurb about who I was. And then she said, happy connecting. And it just makes things so much smoother. That might not always be available to you, but if it is, it's definitely something that helps with that awkwardness.
And my questions really evolved. And eventually I had really great questions about the type of positions, what they mean even, senior analyst, where is that in the hierarchy of things? And I asked several people about pay, because I have no idea what to say to ask me about money. I was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, me too. When I came out of my graduate degree, I had literally no idea how much I was worth, because we were getting paid like 22 grand a year. How do you know your worth when that's where you're starting? I think it's becoming less taboo to talk about pay. That's a really positive step. Some people want to talk about it, some people don't. And I think you just have to kind of play it by ear with that kind of thing.
I never ask anyone's their salary. I ask, what's the range for someone like me? You just have to know industry is different. Your skills are extremely valuable.
Extremely valuable. I think we're so used to being surrounded by people who all have the same toolkit, and so we don't value ourselves as much coming right out of a degree. But you get in industry and you're surrounded by all different types of people, designers, engineers, program managers, and they all have their own set of skills, but very little of those overlap. You are a really important piece to that puzzle.
Now that you're talking about it, do you have any general tips, things you learned as you interviewed? Because we have all the skills in research, but honestly, once I started working in industry, I was really humbled. Wow, there's a lot I have to learn to do differently. So I'm just wondering, as you interview, what tips do you have for people as they're coming out of pure academia to talk to an industry recruiter and then the hiring manager?
That's such a great question. One of the things that I found was super successful for me was that I would always try to figure out what the company's core values were, if they were stated on their website or a mission statement or whatever, and bring that up in the interview if it aligned with my values. And then if I learned it didn't align with my values, maybe I wouldn't interview with them, because people say this all the time, but I think it took me getting into a position to really understand that you also need to be happy with this position. I don't know. I at least got into this mindset of I just need a job. It doesn't matter what the job is, but it does matter, because your first job could define your career. And I would also say learn the jargon, learn the lingo of the field. Even before I graduated, I got a phone interview with a Google recruiter. She passed me along to the hiring manager, and she was so smart. She asked great questions, but there were things that I just didn't know about yet, right? She asked me a scenario-based question, and I answered in a very academic way. And she then asked me, why wouldn't you use a usability test? And now I'm like, okay, usability test is the most well-known methodology in my field, but I didn't know what it was. I couldn't really answer that question. So I shouldn't have gotten that job. And I'm glad that I didn't, because clearly wasn't ready for it. After that, I did some more reading, some more listening, some more talking to folks. And I realized, okay, I really need to know some of these core terms, these core methodologies, because I had the skill set to do usability testing, but I just didn't know what it was. I think just those types of mistakes, everyone's going to make them when you first start. They're definitely learning opportunities.
Yeah, this is so great. So now I've been on both sides. I was looking for a job and I've been hiring. And there's one thing I wanted to bring up. I've seen some people with PhDs do that. They're used to maybe at more academic interviews or the way they're trained, and they talk a lot about themselves and trying to bring up their past studies. No. Read the job offer. Read it carefully. What do they need? Like, I don't need you to explain to me for half an hour that you have the skills. I kind of know that you do. Now let me see if you could fit here with our pace and goals. Read the job description and really listen during the interview what they're asking you, like gauging from that, instead of trying to focus like, let me tell you about all the studies I did or all these methodologies I've used. It might not be relevant to what they're doing.
It sucks, but at the end of the day, nobody cares about your dissertation. It's so really painful, and it's like a Band-Aid you have to rip off. That's a really harsh way to say that. Of course they care, but that's not what they're interviewing you to make sure that you can do the job, to make sure that you're dynamic enough for the team, or that you're able to think in a flexible way. If you only have a week, can you do this? Academics are known for being pretty slow with research. We don't think we are, but we are. And you just can't do that when you've got a product release coming up. I mean, the fact that you have your PhD already establishes a lot of credibility. Already establishes that you know how to do research, so much so that you have a doctorate in it. What you need to prove at that point in the interview is that, hey, look, I'm a good culture fit. I would fit in with your team because I'm gritty, or I can work well with few resources. These are all things academics are good at. We're good at just kind of making something work, even though we don't have a lot to work with.
That's another thing I was going to say. Sometimes when I look at the job descriptions and I'm like, oh, this things really matter to me. This one I don't care about. But you can't tell. The job I got last time, the one I was in for 3 years, I remember there was a strong preference for Spanish. And I almost didn't apply because I was like, well, I'm not fluent. Somebody else will get this job. I ended up applying, got the job, and later asked them, so I don't know Spanish. And they said, oh yeah, we wrote that 10 years ago. It's really hard to change with HR. I just thought that's crazy. Don't be discouraged by a couple of things. Don't find reasons not to apply.
That is such an important point. Hiring managers literally make their wish list of things that they want, only assuming that a candidate will have 25% of them, honestly. And there were so many job postings that I saw where I was like, well, I don't have these skills, but I have this small little bit. And I wasn't applying to them. And then someone was finally like, dude, you need to apply to these. You would be great. I just didn't know that it was more of a wish list than a requirement.
And one more thing I actually wanted to mention. So I'm a nervous interviewer. I talk too much. And to be honest, now that I was on the other side, I've hired for multiple positions at this point. If I'm dozing off when the person's talking, that's a really bad sign. I'm not going to lie to you. This is one of the approaches. It's called STAR. And it's thinking about your answer. If you're asked a behavioral question, situational, it doesn't matter. Anytime you might start rambling, here's the STAR method. What was the situation? S. Task, action, and results. I know it sounds very simple, but instead of going in circles and repeating and being nervous, because especially when you're on Zoom, like nobody's reacting, so you keep talking, it just makes you be concise. Here's what was the situation. Here's what needed to be done. Here's what I did, and here's what happened.
Yeah.
Done. Don't be afraid to stop talking and just get to the point.
That is awesome. I feel like that's good advice for writing your resume too. What was the result of the thing that you did? Not only did I do this study, but this is what came from it.
By the way, I'm so glad you brought up resumes. Very curious. Is your industry resume 1 page or more?
1 page.
Mine too. It was painful.
It was also painful. Yeah, I cried. I deleted all my publications because, like I said, same thing with the dissertation. No one cares. What they care about is the result only.
Did somebody help you?
Yes. I am very lucky. I have a very good friend who is an HR business partner, and she's very blunt. But yeah, she helped me so much. And she was like, look, I know you're proud of this, but no one cares. But if you don't have someone like that, even just giving it to someone who's already in industry can be really helpful.
Yes, perfect. And with me, first, I found some online resources, and I'll mention them in a second, where there were like templates and things to help me cut. So I did that first. Then in some informational interviews, I never asked people to look at it because I know it takes time, but I would have very specific questions. I remember asking someone for this kind of job, do you think I should have publications? They're like, no. That might be actually a negative because they think you want to write, and the reports you're going to be making will be like a couple of sentences. And so I would ask something very, very specific instead of asking them to review.
I feel like if you view your resume as a living document, then it becomes a lot more manageable. It's not just a one and done. You need to always be constantly adding little things, tweaking, making sure that it's up to date. That will really help instead of having to just do one big overhaul every year.
And another thing, let's say nobody's there to help you. Once you start looking for job postings and reading them, you'll probably notice that a lot of things are said in a certain way. Like the things you already know how to do, they're framed this way. So I would use that language in my resume.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I was so sad to lose my publications. I found a way to fit them on one line. So I said, did this resulting in 5 publications, blah, blah.
That's what I did too. Use the number 5. And so it just sticks out. This is your quantitative result, 5 publications. And then if they want to know more about it, they'll ask.
My last question to you, do you have any resources you feel like might be helpful to someone who's new to this?
I approached the transition as a continuous learning process. So for me, if I was in my car, I'd listen to a podcast about user experience. If I had an extra 30 minutes, I would read a chapter in a UX book. And so the podcasts that I found that were the most helpful, Steve Portugal has a podcast called Dollars to Donuts where he interviews industry leaders. It is fantastic just that you can hear people talking about UX and what their team looks like. And as you listen, you start realizing, these teams are all pretty different. It was really helpful for me to understand the state of the field right now. Another one was called Mixed Methods. I believe Adobe produces it, but it's really great too. They talk about research and industry. So those are my top 2 that I really love. They're really easy listening. And then in terms of books, Laura Klein's Building Better Products was a great book. It's very readable. It's pretty short. And then, what was his name? There's 2 books. Steve Krug.
Yeah, I have that one.
These 2, they're tiny, very, very easy to consume. They just help you kind of start reframing your brain away from academic way of thinking and really thinking about products if you're going into tech.
Perfect. And I will add a couple more. So there's actually a kind of society helping PhDs transition. It's called Cheeky Scientists. And they have podcasts and webinars and blogs. I have to tell you, it helps so much with mental health because you just don't know anything. You feel like you're starting something you've never done before. And just listening to it and being like, cool. This is something I could ask in my next interview. This is something I should add to my cover letter. And honestly, I always thought they were more geared towards STEM. But all the tips for interview and for how to frame yourself, they have a resume tool on their website that's free. All of that transferred. So that's one I really like. Twitter can be a great resource. There's another called Beyond
Twitter is great.
Beyond Professorate, and they have also a whole bunch of resources, blog posts, and sometimes going on Twitter and searching, I think one of the hashtags is altac, like alternative academia, I guess. And it's people who go into industry or thinking about it.
One more that I really love is called D-Scout, and they have a blog called People Nerds, and they talk about research, and they're super interesting.
Thank you so much, Katie. I really hope this is useful for someone who is overwhelmed. It's not like the information isn't out there. You could find it. Podcasts, talking to people, going to meetups. All I can say is that it gets easier. It's tough at first. It's overwhelming. You have to put the hours in. Every Sunday I would sit down. I'm going to look through job postings, make a lot of coffee. And then it gets easier and it makes more and more sense and it flows. So it took me, for example, to transition 4 months of applying pretty aggressively. I don't know how many applications, over 60 I did.
It took me 5 months and I applied to 89 places. I will say some of that was me trying to figure out what type of job I wanted. So I was applying very broadly to market research and consumer insights as well as UX. Once I started narrowing it down to UX, I tried to get a lot more targeted. Out of those 89, I had 6 interviews, I believe. But, it only takes one person to say yes, and then you can start establishing your credibility in industry, and then things get a lot easier.
And by the way, some of the jobs tend to have tests. To be honest, for me, it was one of the best ways to tell if I would like this job. There was one where I did it, and I just thought, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. And if they don't give you a test, that's also a sign.
You can get such a good sense how they do things and what they want. You can see if that's a fit for you. Like you said, you might feel desperate, but you should really pause and make sure you could like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your time.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. Thank you so much. You too.